In the northern coastal town of Karsvik, the sea was never gentle. It crashed against the rocks with a violence that felt personal, as if it had a memory long older than the town itself. The fishermen who stayed there claimed the sea held grudges. Their parents had said the same, and their grandparents before them. The waves didn't just hit the shore, they clawed at it, trying to drag something back. At the very edge of the harbor stood an old hotel called Marina Nord. It had once been painted white, but decades of storms had stripped the color until it looked like a washed-out skeleton of a building. The windows were clouded with salt, and the roof leaned as if tired of holding itself together. Travelers rarely stayed more than a night, and those who did rarely stayed twice. Inside, the hallways smelled of wet carpet and drifting sea air. The wooden floor creaked from places where no one walked. The walls absorbed sound strangely, swallowing footsteps before they could echo, and though no sign or announcement ever mentioned it, guests unconsciously avoided the third floor. They pressed elevator buttons without looking, but their fingers never hovered over the one marked 3. Something in the body protested before the mind understood why. Room 313 was the reason. Its door remained closed year-round. The brass number had dulled into a brownish stain. No cleaning carts ever stopped in front of it. No guest names were ever written beside its slot on the logbook. Some staff swore the room didn't exist on the digital map. Others said the map was wrong. But everyone agreed on one thing. That door should never open. On a storm-heavy October night, Jonas Nyberg arrived at Marina Nord. His car had broken down on the highway, forcing him to walk 2 kilometers through relentless rain. His jacket was soaked enough to cling to his body like a second layer of skin. His boots squelched on the floor as he stepped inside the lobby. He was worn out, hungry, miserable, and too exhausted to notice the uneasy glance the receptionist gave him. Her name was SIV, and she had worked in the hotel long enough to know the signs of a bad night. The wind outside howled like something wounded, shaking the old window frames. Lightning flickered over the sea, illuminating the waterlogged pier. Something about this storm felt familiar to her in a way she wished it didn't. "You're checking in?" she asked, though the answer was obvious. Jonas nodded. "Car died. Just need a room for the night." She typed slowly on her computer, her fingers tense, as if afraid of what might appear. The computer froze twice. She restarted it, muttering under her breath. Finally, she exhaled heavily. "There's one room available," she said, though she sounded unconvinced. She reached beneath the desk, pushing aside papers, old receipts, and a tangled set of keys. When her hand finally stopped, her expression tightened. She pulled out a brass key attached to a cracked leather tag. Jonas didn't notice her hand trembling. The tag read, 313. She held it for a moment, as though debating whether the storm outside was worse than whatever waited upstairs. "This room is rarely used," she said. "If you hear anything tonight, it's just the wind. The building is old." Jonas shrugged. "I've stayed in worse." He took the key. Her fingers lingered on it a moment, as if wanting to pull it back. "You should stay in bed," she said quietly, "no matter what you hear." He raised an eyebrow, but she didn't elaborate. Instead, she offered him a towel and pointed him toward the elevator. The third floor was colder than the rest of the hotel. Not drafty cold, as though the temperature itself hesitated there. The lights flickered irregularly, dimming too long before brightening again. The carpet felt uneven beneath his feet, bulging in odd places as if something moved under it slowly, pushing upward then settling back down. Room 313 waited at the far end. Its door looked darker than the others, as if absorbing the dim light instead of reflecting it. Jonas inserted the key. The lock clicked open smoothly, suspiciously well-oiled for a room rarely used. Inside, the air was stale. Not rotten, not sour, just stale like a room sealed too long. A faint smell of dust, mixed with cold salt water, lingered. A single lamp on the nightstand glowed weakly. The bed was neatly made with crisp sheets, tucked tight at the corners. Jonas dropped his bag, changed into dry clothes, and sat on the bed. The mattress felt firmer than expected, as if no one had ever lain on it. The storm outside raged, but in here the sound came softened, as if the walls absorbed it. He lay down and closed his eyes. He didn't know how long he slept before the noises woke him. Soft footsteps, slow, dragging, as though someone walked barefoot, heel first, toe trailing behind. They came from the far end of the hallway. Jonas sat up, listening. The footsteps grew louder, passing each door. Then they paused right outside his room. A shadow moved under the bottom gap of the door. Then silence. A moment later, something thin slid under the door. Jonas hesitated before walking over. A cold wave rolled through the air, causing goosebumps to rise on his arms. He crouched down and picked up the object. It was a photograph. A Polaroid, faded, edges curled. He held it toward the lamplight. His heart stuttered. The photo showed the inside of his room, from the exact angle near the wardrobe. The bed, the lamp, the sheets. Everything perfectly captured. Except the person lying in the bed wasn't Jonas. It was a man with hollow cheeks and expressionless eyes, staring upward with a frozen, breathless stillness. His skin was pale, gray-tinted, his hair matted, his mouth slightly open as if mid-exhale. Jonas looked at the wardrobe, the corner from which the photo had been taken. Empty. His breath quickened. He opened the door. The hallway was empty, silent, but the light closest to his door flickered violently, as though disturbed by something that had just passed. Jonas closed the door, locked it, and lay back down. Sleep refused him. At 3:17 a.m., knocking jolted him awake. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps again. He approached slowly, each step careful. He pressed his ear to the door. On the other side, a voice whispered in a trembling, broken tone. Not threatening, not angry, just pleading. Don't leave me. Not again. Jonas stepped back. Who's there? He whispered. Silence swallowed the words. Morning brought no comfort. He stormed downstairs, photograph in hand. SIV pale when she saw it. You shouldn't have that, she whispered. What is going on? Jonas demanded. Someone was in my room last night. No one goes to the 3rd floor, she said. We don't clean it. We don't assign rooms there. You assign me one. Her face twisted. No, the system shouldn't allow it. That room, it resets itself. It shouldn't appear, but on nights like this, her voice cracked. Nights like what? Jonas asked. Nights when people come alone. When the storm hits the coast the same way it did the night he died. Who died? SIV swallowed, her voice trembling. A man. Years ago. They found him on the bed in room 313. Eyes open. No wounds. No struggle. As if something took him without touching him. Jonas stared at her. And you kept the room? We closed it. Sealed it. Hid the key. But sometimes the room calls itself back. As if it chooses someone. Jonas didn't wait for more. He ran upstairs to pack. But the door to room 313 was open. Just a sliver. Inside, cold air poured out like fog. The lamp flickered, though the bulb wasn't loose. On the bed lay another Polaroid. This one showed Jonas sleeping. His face relaxed, unaware. The photo had been taken from inches above him. He dropped it, heart hammering. Someone had stood over him. Someone had watched him. The door slammed behind him, shaking the walls. Then the whisper came again, closer, clearer, filled with aching loneliness. Stay. Stay with me this time. Jonas ran. Down the stairs, through the lobby, out into the storm. He ran until his lungs burned. He never returned. Weeks later, hotel staff reported his abandoned belongings. Investigators searched room 313. They found the room untouched, as though no one had stayed there in years. But on the bed lay a new photograph. Jonas, caught mid-turn, fleeing the room. Behind him, sitting on the bed, was the pale man from the earlier photo. His head slightly tilted, his grin faint, his eyes following Jonas as he ran. And beneath the photo, written in shaky handwriting, were 3 words. He came back.
The second story begins far from the city, in a place where the coastline is colder than the water itself. A place where the wind tastes like iron. It begins inside an old, isolated building known to travelers only by the faded letters on its crooked sign. The Hollow Hotel. Most people drove past without slowing down. The structure leaned a little, as if one good storm could finally push it into the sea. The windows were dark even at noon, and the porch light was always on, no matter the time of day, casting a weak cone of yellow onto the cracked stone steps. Thomas Arden didn't plan to stay there. His car had overheated somewhere along the desolate coastal road, and by the time he coaxed it back to life and saw the hotel in the distance, the sun had already fallen behind a wall of low clouds. He wasn't afraid of driving at night, but something about the road ahead, the way it narrowed and disappeared into fog, made the hotel look like a better option than continuing. He parked beside a rusted truck that looked abandoned. There were no other cars. The wind hit him as soon as he stepped out. It was sharp and metallic, like breathing in cold coins. The hotel's front door stood half open. No sound came from inside. He stepped into the lobby and was met by a smell that wasn't quite dust, not quite mold. It was closer to the scent of old clothes shut in a wardrobe for too long, holding on to the air of another time. The floorboards beneath the thin carpet creaked softly under his weight. There was a reception desk to the right, but no one behind it. A tarnished bell sat on the counter. Thomas pressed it. The chime rang out, clear and bright, and then dissolved into a strange sort of echo that seemed to come back from deeper inside the hotel, slightly delayed, as if the building took a moment to decide whether to answer. After a few seconds, a man appeared from a side door. He was in his 50s, with gray hair combed neatly back and a black vest over a white shirt that had yellowed at the collar. His name tag was crooked and scratched, but the name was still readable. Henry. "Good evening," Henry said. "You're right on time." "On time for what?" Thomas asked. "For checking in," Henry replied, as if they'd already discussed it. "You must be Mr. Arden." Thomas hesitated. "Yeah. How did you?" "Reservation from the agency," Henry said. "They always send someone when the season turns. We've prepared a room for you." Thomas didn't remember mentioning his name to anyone, but he decided it didn't matter. He signed where Henry indicated in an old ledger that smelled faintly of smoke. There were names written there in neat, cramped handwriting, dates stretching back decades. The most recent entry before his was more than a year old. Henry slid a key across the counter. It was real metal, attached to a rectangular brass tag engraved with the number 14. "Second floor," he said. "Last door on the left. The others are occupied." Thomas glanced at the ledger again. Only a few names on each page. Too few to fill an entire hotel. "Busy place," he said dryly. Henry smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "You might hear your neighbors. Every guest thinks they're the only one here. They're not." On the way up the stairs, Thomas tried to decide if that was supposed to be a joke. The hallway on the second floor was long and narrow. The wallpaper had once been pale green, now faded into a grayish tone that made everything look underwater. The carpet runner was worn down the center, as if countless feet had walked the same path. The lights overhead were dim and widely spaced, leaving pockets of shadow between them. Room 14 was at the very end, just as Henry had said. The door was plain, the brass number slightly tilted. When Thomas unlocked it and stepped inside, the first thing he noticed was how quiet it was. Not normal hotel quiet, but a kind of padded silence that seemed to sit on his shoulders. The room was simple. A bed with a wooden headboard, a small wardrobe, a writing desk under a narrow window, a chair, and a lamp whose shade was stained at the edges. The window looked out over the sea, but the glass was cloudy, as if someone had breathed on it and never wiped it away. He could barely make out the outline of the horizon. He dropped his bag on the bed and sat down. The mattress sighed under his weight, springs complaining quietly. He checked his phone. No signal. No Wi-Fi networks. The time blinked at him, frozen on the last moment he'd had reception. He told himself it was fine. Maybe it was what he needed. No messages. No calls. No one asking how he was holding up. The first sound came just after he turned off the lamp. It was late enough that the window was nothing but a black square, and the only light in the room was a sliver under the door where the hallway lamps glowed. Thomas drifted toward sleep, feeling his body finally start to unwind. Then he heard it. A voice, muffled, indistinct, coming from the room next to his. He couldn't make out words, only the cadence of speech, slow, low, as if someone was talking to themselves. Then a second voice, higher, sharper, cut in, and the two overlapped in a quick, heated exchange. It sounded like an argument. He stared at the ceiling, waiting for it to stop. Didn't. The voices rose, fell, then dropped into a harsh whisper that crawled under his skin. He could hear movement too, the thump of something hitting a wall, the scrape of furniture being shifted. He checked the time on his phone. The screen still showed the last signal time. Useless. He stood up, crossed the room, and pressed his ear to the wall. The voices were clearer now, but still not quite understandable. A man's voice, tired and angry. A woman's voice, brittle and close to breaking. Every few lines, he thought he recognized a word, but it slipped away before his mind could catch it. He stepped back. It was none of his business. He lay down again and eventually slept. In the morning, he went downstairs for coffee. The dining room was empty, a few tables set with mismatched cups and plates. A pot of coffee steamed on a sideboard, next to a tray of bread and small packets of butter. Henry appeared as Thomas poured himself a cup. "Sleep well?" the hotelier asked. "The people in the next room didn't," Thomas said. "Seemed like they were at it half the night." Henry frowned. "You're in 14. "Yeah. There's no one in 13, Henry said. "Or 15. You're the only guest on that floor." Thomas stared at him. "I heard them. A man and a woman. They were arguing. They moved furniture." Henry's face remained neutral, but something tightened around his mouth. "Old buildings carry sound in strange ways," he said. "Sometimes the wind finds cracks." "The wind doesn't argue about who should have left first," Thomas replied. He meant it as a joke, but Henry didn't smile. "If it bothers you," he said, "I can move you to another room. It's fine." Thomas took a sip of coffee that tasted like burned dust. Probably just tired. Long day. He considered asking if maybe Henry had guests who weren't logged in, or if someone else had a key. Instead, he ate in silence and went outside to look at his car, pretending that whatever happened in the night had a simple explanation. By late afternoon, the sky had darkened again. Storm clouds piled up over the sea. Thomas tried to write at the small desk in his room, but the words refused to arrange themselves into anything that made sense. He had come here planning to write about isolation, about forgotten places, about the way some buildings held onto their past like a bruise. Instead, each time he typed a sentence, his mind drifted back to the voices. When the first drops of rain began to hit the window, he pushed his chair back. The corridor outside his room seemed longer than before. The overhead lights struggled, buzzing faintly. The doors to the other rooms were all closed, their keyholes dark. He walked slowly past them, counting 10, 11, 12, 13. He stopped in front of the door adjacent to his. There was nothing unusual about it. Same wood, same handle, same tarnished brass number. He lifted his hand and pressed his fingers lightly against the door. It was cold, colder than the surrounding air. He listened. Nothing. No voices. No movement. Not even the subtle creak of an old building settling. He told himself that was what he had wanted. Proof that the sounds from the night before were just his brain misfiring, merging his thoughts with the wind and the distant surf. Still, as he turned away, he had the faint, irrational sensation that someone on the other side of the door was doing the exact same thing. Standing very still, holding their breath, listening for him. That night, the voices returned. They came later this time, closer to the point when sleep tumbles into dream. At first, Thomas thought he was imagining it, thoughts reshaping themselves into sound. But as he lay there, he realized the rhythm was not his. The pauses were wrong. The words pushed against the wall between them. This time he could make some of it out. "You can't keep doing this. You left. You were the one who left. I didn't leave, you pushed me." Sometimes one voice overlapped the other, and sometimes there was a long silence between them, full of breathing. Thomas sat up in the darkness, heart beating too fast for a man simply listening. He pictured the people in that room, whoever they were. Couple. Maybe on the edge of splitting. Maybe already fallen off. He didn't want to hear his own life in their argument, but he did. He got out of bed, crossed the room, and opened his door. The hallway was empty, lights burning with the same flat yellow. The voices were still going, a muffled storm just on the other side of the wall. He walked toward the neighboring door and stopped in front of it. The number on the brass tag seemed darker tonight. He raised his hand to knock. For a second, the voices stopped. The silence on the other side was so complete that it felt like the entire hotel was holding its breath. Thomas lowered his hand. He backed away and returned to his room. He locked the door, though he knew it wouldn't help against whatever he was really afraid of. In the morning, he noticed something on the floor, half under the bed. Piece of paper. He picked it up. It was a fragment of a printed receipt from a gas station. The ink smeared by time. The top half was torn off. All that remained was a date from 3 years earlier and part of a name, cut through the middle. His own last name. He stared at it for a long time, then put it on the desk without understanding why it unsettled him so much. At breakfast, Henry asked if he was enjoying his stay. Thomas mentioned the voices again. Sometimes guests think they hear things, Henry said. Think? Thomas asked. Grief echoes, Henry replied. It likes empty spaces. Hotels, hospitals, all the places in between. I didn't tell you I was grieving, Thomas said. Henry met his gaze calmly. You booked a single room in late autumn at a hotel no one advertises, miles from anywhere you know. You arrived alone with too little luggage and too many thoughts. I don't need a file to recognize someone who came here to be away from people. Thomas looked down at his coffee. Its surface trembled slightly from the tremor in his hand. Do the other guests hear them too? He asked. There are no other guests, Henry said. Not this week. The third night, the voices didn't come from the next room. They came from inside his. He woke to the sensation that someone was sitting on the edge of his bed. The mattress dipped, reacting to a weight that wasn't his. His body froze, still caught between sleep and waking. He could feel pressure near his feet, as if someone had placed their hand there. He forced himself to sit up. There was no one. The room was empty. The shadows were ordinary. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood. The air felt thicker, his breath slightly too warm against his own skin. In the window, his reflection stared back at him, distorted by the uneven glass. For a moment, he thought there was someone standing just behind his shoulder. When he turned, there was only the wardrobe. He considered leaving, even in the middle of the night, even if it meant driving on that narrow, broken road through fog and rain. But the thought of the world outside felt distant. The hotel had wrapped itself around him, gently but firmly, like a hand on the back of his neck. He sat at the desk on the final morning and tried to write about the Hollow Hotel. He wrote about the architecture, about the way the corridors bent the light, about the way sound carried in odd ways. He described the lobby, the ledger, Henry's quiet presence. He didn't write about the voices. He didn't write about the way they had begun to use phrases only he and one other person in the world had ever said to each other. He didn't write about how, the night before, he'd heard his own name spoken in the exact tone she had used the last time they spoke on the phone. He folded the receipt fragment and put it in his pocket. When he went downstairs to check out, Henry had the ledger already open to a blank line. Leaving so soon? He asked. I've stayed long enough, Thomas said. Henry nodded. The Hollow tends to attract people in the middle of something. Some leave lighter. Some leave heavier. He slid the book toward Thomas. Sign, please. Thomas picked up the pen, hesitated, then wrote his name. As he did, he noticed 2 faint indentations on the line above his, like someone had pressed down with a pen but never released any ink. The loops and angles of the invisible letters were familiar. He realized they matched the handwriting of the notes he used to find on his kitchen table, written by the person who no longer lived there. On the drive away from the hotel, the road felt shorter. The sky slowly brightened, the sea losing its metallic sheen. By the time Thomas reached a town with cell service, his phone buzzed with delayed notifications. As if reality had finally caught up, he stopped at a cafe and pulled out the crumpled receipt fragment. On the back, in faint blue ink, someone had written a single sentence. "You were never the only one here." The handwriting was his. He didn't remember writing it,